evening, everyone, and welcome to everybody's favorite, biggest little soccer podcast on the internet. It's Stateside Footy. I, of course, am Steve Silver, and joining me tonight from Prost International is Jeff Lageson. Jeff, good evening. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Excellent, man. Excellent. Well, we got ourselves a nice show centered around, the Seattle Sounders of Major League Soccer. We're going to get into that in just 1 second, but before we do, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons. Let's grow this channel out. Also, go ahead and share this on the old Twitter webs, on the social medias, and let's really grow this channel out. That would be much appreciated. Also, if you want to be a part of tonight's conversation, go ahead and drop that into the comment section, and we will answer your questions as the show goes on. So let's not bury the lead, Jeff, and let's get into it. One of the questions that I have for you starting off, because I see this all the time when it comes to, Sounders Twitter, Sounders Reddit, and, different fan outlets. People are wondering what the plan is because they see this is the third straight transfer window, summer transfer window that came and went without any incoming. And when it comes to the January window, it's minimal at best. And so it begs the question, what is the plan right now in regards to ownership and where this first team is going to be next year come 2025 Club World Cup, and then also 2026 when the United States hosts the World Cup.
Well, and that's a big one. You've got a lot of younger players. You've got a core of players that have been there for a while. Players like Rui Diaz that are getting ready to be out of and cycle through and freeing up spots. We're coming out of a period where they did have a dip at the start of the season and played themselves back into playoffs, but unfortunately they've also ran into LAFC in two separate tournaments and been knocked out by the same team. And when we look at the regular season standings and we look at the financial valuations that are out there, who's above them in those things, and that's who it is. So that's where they've got to chase, and we have to look at the roster and the situation and realize that that's who they have to beat to get where they're going, and that's a big question.
Yeah, you mentioned that they got off to a slow start, and I actually went across this. It turns out since April 28th, the Sounders are 19-4-5 in league competition, and that's actually quite amazing considering when you look at the complexity of this attack. Most of the goal contributions is coming from Jordan Morris, who's absolutely on fire right now. And then their do everything piece, Albert Rusnak, and especially how special Albert Rusnak has been this year, considering that João Paulo got hurt again. He almost feels like, Gustav Svensson in a way where he's kind of that go get stuff done piece. You know what I mean? He's that all everything piece in the central midfield. And of course, I believe he's coming up on contract as well too. He's 30 years old. It's actually kind of amazing considering they're getting minimal production from the wings, and yet still the Sounders right now are in fifth place, locked into a playoff spot. Well, damn near locked into a playoff spot. It's actually quite impressive with all things considered.
It is, and Rusnak, where would they be without him this year? Is a big question because Morris needs to be fed to score, and you're looking at a situation where they had to dig themselves out of that hole. They've played themselves into it. They're getting into a spot, and they need to be healthy to do that. And are they going to get it from the designated player spots where the investment is supposed to be? And that is the Rusnak and De La Vega and Rui Diaz. And as supporters and fans, they should be looking at that as the places where they're getting the most bang for their buck. And Rusnak's giving them that.
Absolutely. The interesting thing about Rusnak is he's 30 years old, and he's coming up on contract. And there's a lot of talk about whether or not if they bring him back, is it worth bringing him back on a TP contract, considering he's 30 years old. And when you look at the core of this team, when you look at Stefan Fry, Yaimar, Nuhu, Jordan Morris, Christian Roldan, Albert Rusnak, the average age of that core is 31 years old. The rest of the league is down at 26 years old now. So the rest of the league seems to get younger while the Sounders seem to get older. I'm of the opinion that I wouldn't mind having Albert Rusnak back, but I actually value the DP spot, the roster spot, more than I actually value Albert Rusnak. And if he is to come back, I would have no problem bringing him back on a TAM level contract. But I'd rather keep the DP spot open because I just think there's a lot more creativity that you can do with that spot.
That's true. And then the question becomes, will a player come back to the same team under that? And that becomes a challenge with roster building, is players seem to be willing to go other places and take that pickup, but not necessarily stay where they are when that hits. There's definitely a challenge with that. You've seen that with other Sounders who have gone on to take pay cuts but play in other cities instead of staying in Seattle when that salary dropped.
Absolutely. The other question is whether or not the Sounders actually have the money to fuel that creativity. You mentioned that Rui Diaz is coming up on contract, and whether or not it was even smart bringing him back, considering he's being used as a super sub this year. I don't like the idea of having a DP coming off the bench. It kind of defeats the purpose of having a DP. Pedro de la Vega really hasn't featured a lot this season, coming back off of injury, and of course Albert Rusnak. Me personally, I just remember the days where Chris Henderson was running things in the scouting department, and the pipelines that he had in South America and the creativity that he showed. Obviously, that's no longer the case. He's in Inter Miami, and we know exactly what he's done down there. The question I have for you, number one, is: do the Sounders actually have the money to get creative with those DP spots? And if so, will they spend the money?
I think it's more of a will they when we look at things, because we do know that players are coming off the books and that frees up holes in those salary cap situations. So the question isn't necessarily, I think, really that can they, it's will they. Track record is that they do go out and find young players with previous GMs. Will we see that with Weibel in that role? De La Vega has come in, but in the 15 years of MLS, we saw the Montero and those sorts of moves early and how those paid off. We need to see that from De La Vega, because right now it's a big giant question mark on the value.
Absolutely. The reason why I bring up the financial issue, as we've seen over the course of the last 5 years, Joe Roth is no longer majority owner of this team. Adrian Hanauer is, of course. COVID put this team in a very precarious situation when it comes to revenue and resources, and then the way that they rebounded, investing in the Longacres site, $70 million training facility, which obviously includes the training pitches, the locker rooms, the office space, and from what it sounds like, that investment is a larger part of it's going to be a part of a larger development at the site that's going to include 3,000 apartment units, restaurants, bars, hotels, and I would probably assume all of that's going to surround a potential new stadium at the Longacres site. I think it's no secret that the Sounders covet something like that, and even Adrian Hanauer went public and said that they do have a couple 10-acre parcels that could fit a stadium, and the Sounders are only one of 3 MLS teams now that don't specifically own their own stadium.
And that gets into a big picture. That's not going to be a short-term fix to where they're at right now.
Sure.
But it's definitely part of the big picture, especially when they've talked about how the new facility is for the next 50, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, could we see them wanting to do that? Yeah, and that land down there gives them that opportunity. So we can all read into that, just like you're saying. That makes sense. We're also starting to see, though, when they partnered with private equity to purchase the Reign, those are some interesting implications to partnering with some of those sorts of groups that add money bags to the ownership group. Is that going to transfer not just for the Reign side of things, which is now a big part of their operation, but will that also become a part of the Sounders ownership group? Those sorts of questions, as they start to flesh out, will answer a lot of things for us.
Absolutely. Because to me, when I asked the question earlier whether or not they have the money, because it's I don't know if you're aware of this. right now, Sounders ownership really doesn't do a lot of interviews, but they did speak at a Sounders Alliance meeting, which is available on YouTube right now if anybody wants to go check that out. And it was very interesting to hear Adrian Hanauer talk about this, because he comes out and says that, number one, that, the Sounders' priority is to win trophies, full stop. That's exactly the quote. Full stop, we want to win trophies. But he also goes on to say that the Sounders are never going to win a transfer window. Okay, fair enough. But, he also goes on to say that right now the Sounders are committed in investing in outside interests to generate new revenue streams. And it seems to me that the priority isn't necessarily on the first team per se. That I got the impression that, when you look at this team, where it was at the time of the pandemic, and of course, this isn't an EPL team where they don't have the $1 billion television revenue. They don't have the sponsorship revenue or the fallback of the Champions League, which is worth $100 million to, each participating team. So they don't have those type of revenue streams. And so when something like that happens in a team, especially an MLS team that's dependent on match day revenue, right, you can understand the Sounders want and need to make sure they have different revenue streams. And if that means that they keep their first team, I guess you can say, their financials steady for a couple seasons, not necessarily bringing a lot of incomings, just kind of keeping this core, letting it age out while they generate that extra revenue, or they develop those new revenue streams. It seems like that's the route that they're taking.
Well, especially since that group is still competitive. Like, it's not like they're dropping, they had the tough start, but, quarterfinal of League Cup, semifinal of Open Cup, they've played themselves back into a playoff spot. That core group, when it gets its feet under it, and gets everybody on the field, and the defense isn't getting red cards every game, is definitely able to get, it's a lot easier to get players on the field. Like, they didn't have that early in the season. So if you can get and milk not just the money situation out of it, but still be competitive through that can ease the pain of some of that change that's inevitably going to come later, and you kind of push it off while you focus on other things. Yeah, you totally can see that could be what they're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the transfer window, the Sounders never really have been flashy anyways. I mean, they've always been shrewd operators with inside their salary cap as far back as I can remember. I think the only time that they have ever made national news was when they brought in Clint Dempsey, 2013, ahead of the 2014 World Cup. And outside of that, they've really just done solid transfer business, especially under Gareth Lagerwey, which was, I guess, at the height of what we considered, what the highest limit of this franchise is able to do. So from that standpoint, yeah, like I don't, it doesn't bother me that the Sounders don't make flashy transfers. But ahead of we're 1 year ahead of the Club World Cup, and that has to be a little sketchy because this team, as it stands, going into a tournament like that, as prestige like that, it's not just being able to compete in that tournament. It's also about getting that brand out there, and how you perform on the field is equally as essential as getting that brand out there.
And that Dempsey move at the time was shocking. It was a several $million move, and that they had not made before. Ladero's was spendy, but the Ladero move is now 8 summers ago. Yeah. And he's no longer here. So Rui Diaz came along not long after, and we haven't seen those big money moves since. I do think that fans have a right to be, especially when they hear about outside investments, worried that the eye is straying from the product on the field, and that maybe there's some complacency in the roster building. And that is definitely a concern, because are you going to end up reloading or rebuilding if you wait too long? And you don't want to be in a situation where you have a teardown. You want to be a team that reloads and doesn't rebuild. And Seattle has been able to do that with the moves when they brought in Dempsey, when they brought in Martins. This followed when Montero had left. Dempsey's, you start doing these sequels. Who's going to replace Rui Diaz? Is De La Vega the answer? We hope so. He's here. They've spent the money. You still want to maximize it. You want it to work out, but who's then going to take that next spot if they do, like you said, the TM money with Riznak, if that changes, who would fill that spot? There's definitely some interesting players out there, but you also have a situation where you have a lot of those young players are just being hoarded by Chelsea and these teams that have these massive rosters and then farm everybody out on loan.
Right. They have the loan army. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice to have a Sounders loan army. But one of the things that I took a lot of shit from Sounders fans. It's true. I have no problem admitting that I took a lot of crap. When the Sounders missed the playoffs in 2022 after a decade-long streak of making the playoffs and being at that point for 5 straight years the best team in Major League Soccer by far. I mean, I think they went to 4 MLS Cup finals in 5 years, winning 2. CONCACAF Champions League, which I guess they kind of sold out for a little bit in early 2022. Ended up missing the playoffs. Okay, fine. I think at that point in time for me, that's when I actually thought it would have been smart to blow it up, because you take a look at the landscape of what that roster looked like at that time. Aging goalkeeper and Stefan Fry, Christian and Alex Roldan. Me personally, I would have looked at that as an opportunity to move on from certain players 1 year early before it became 1 year too late. And we also know that a couple months later, word came out that would have been Nico Ladeiros going into his last season. And I just thought it was an opportune time, missing the playoffs, where you literally could unload a lot of players, open up a lot of roster spots, and do yourself a favor, bringing in with a new GM an opportunity just to kind of rebuild it in his model, along with Brian Schmetzer, and really just set the tone for the next 10 years. Because it just didn't really seem like they necessarily had a plan. Instead of getting rid of players, they extended a few players. I guess you can say that maybe they were worried about how that would play to the fan base if they got rid of popular players. And so, they extended some guys that I didn't necessarily believe they should have. And I just thought that was the opportune time. You missed the playoffs for the first time in your franchise history, and it just seemed like it was a good time to sell it to a fan base. Hey, listen, we had some great times, but we have to think about the next 10 years, and maybe it's time to start building a new core.
Well, and winning solves a lot of that angst fans get.
Sure.
So, I mean, if you hit with a couple of those things, we tracking the MLS era, 2009, they came out strong.
Yeah.
That team was Ozzy, Freddie, whatnot. Yeah. That started to play out. They'd won some Open Cups. Then all of a sudden you bring in Deuce, you bring in Martins. Yeah. That starts going, Ziggy goes, and you start seeing those things. We have to see that next thing. The track record is there, so we know they can. The question becomes, what are we going to do? It's there institutionally. We don't know it yet with Weibel, because we haven't seen that play out yet. We saw that with Henderson. We saw that with Lagerwey. We haven't seen that yet with Weibel. Again, a lot of it, I think a lot of his credibility is going to come down to whether or not De La Vega pays out.
Yeah.
If De La Vega gets healthy and gets contributing and gets hot and fans get behind him, great. If not, and he flames out and it was money poorly spent, then the credibility gap starts to grow with the fan base. And it's reasonable to do that, especially when much of it is aging.
Right. I did like the re-signing. I did like the extension from Jackson Reagan. I thought that was a good signing long term. I think he's now re-signed for 2027. I think they signed, I can't remember. I can't pronounce his name, but he's the young right winger.
I do like that they have young players coming up.
Maybe, yeah, for sure. In some respect, I like some of the young talent that he's extended. Makes a lot of sense. This team is going to need depth, so 100%. I like that. But overall, I don't know. I'm not sold on whether or not Craig Weibel is good for this franchise long term.
Well, and you also start looking at money in, money out, and revenue streams of selling players. Did they miss on not taking reported money for Nuhu when they had a chance that they could have flipped into another transfer to something else? Yeah. Did they wait too long with Nico? Did they wait? Those sorts of questions are all out there and valid, especially as when teams get old, they tend to get old really fast. And you see that across the sporting landscape. Teams do tend to get a little bit too nostalgic, and they get feeling sense of loyalty, the teams that aren't are very often the ones that are a little bit more ruthless, but maintain their status at the top of tables, as opposed to having to constantly rebuild. They reload, they reload, they reload. They wish everybody well, but they also do what's smart for now and not just later, and don't rely on the fact that they're paying for something that was as opposed to is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Switching gears real quick, before we get into the rain portion of tonight, I want to ask you about the Major League Soccer salary cap. Obviously, revenue ties into everything when it comes to raising the cap. I know a lot of American soccer fans are on the pro rel side of things. I don't think we're ever going to see a scenario where Major League Soccer will ever adopt a pro rel system with the USL. I just don't see it. A lot of people, will point to the $500 million expansion fees that are played. I actually point to the franchise valuation because of the closed system. It created an artificial bubble that jacked up the franchise valuations. And so, when you pay $300 million and all of a sudden 3 years later your franchise is valued at $800 million, there's no way in hell Major League Soccer owners are going to go for any type of pro rel system. But the one thing they can do, and I've been a very big proponent of this, especially that we only have a finite amount of time with Messi in this league, and of course we're on the cusp of the 2026 World Cup. Is the potential to raise the salary cap? I think right now it's $5.4 million across the league. That's not including the DP salaries for each team. But that being said, one of the things that I always have a conversation about is fan retention. What happens with this league once Messi leaves, or post 2026 World Cup? How are you going to retain the fans that you had brought in? How are you going to get those fans that are genuine soccer fans, but every single Saturday they're watching the English Premier League and not Major League Soccer? And I would probably assume that quality is going to play a big role into that, because as we're seeing right now in Major League Soccer, the DPs are usually geared towards goal scoring, central attackers, wingers, strikers, that type of thing. And obviously, when you look at goals scored across the league, I think right now it's like at 3.4 goals per game. So this league is a heavy offensive league, which is fine, I guess. But me personally, I prefer balance. And one of the ways that you're going to be able to up the quality of this league, you're going to have to up the salary cap. And I'm not one of those type of guys that thinks you should rip off the Band-Aid and just let owners spend whatever they want. You're going to have, situations like you're going to see in the Premier League where only 5 teams really just spend a grip of money while the rest of them are just trying to tread water. That's not the situation I want to see. But if Major League Soccer were to up the salary cap to 10 million, to 15 million, somewhere around those lines where it opens up the door to, to transfers from Europe, or even allows them to bring in stars from South America that might be at a higher price point, I would be 100% for that. I think we're at that time now where we have 30 teams in the league. Like when it was 15 teams, I can understand keeping a salary cap low, but now you have the infrastructure in place, and I think you have the revenue where it justifies raising a salary cap.
Yeah, they have to. In a perfect world with pro rel, you have to have the infrastructure to do it. Most of the cities that don't have MLS teams don't have that sort of thing in place. You just see what you see in England and other places where there's essentially a 2-tiered league, right? You have 6 or 7 teams that realistically are competitive in England, and even then, that's pushing it. In a league that's deeper. That middle tier is mostly just staying up, and then you have a whole bunch of teams that bounce up and down. And relegation battles are desperate teams playing ugly soccer. So those aren't exactly, the most attractive things to watch on television. Let's watch bad teams try and desperately survive. That the relegation part of that is ugly. The promotion part of it is cool.
Sure.
It would be great. It'd be great. But again, the salary cap and revenue seems to lag behind in MLS in every stage of the league. Right now, it really needs to be upped because the revenue streams have been going up, attendance is going up, all of those different things,
Yep.
the merchandising. If you're not paying now, when?
Correct.
Players have the opportunity. I don't know when is the CBA through like 27 or something like
Yeah.
that right now.
2027. Yeah.
The NWSL players opened theirs early, 2 years early, and got it done. MLS players, tag, you're it. If the other league can do it, so can you. And it really benefited players and player salaries on the women's league side, and it absolutely is necessary to up the overall quality, because talent dilution as your league gets bigger and bigger is a real thing. And if they don't pay to
100%.
keep it up, you're going to have more and more mediocre teams, and a handful of teams that have the money and resources that are at the top over and over and over again. And it's just going to be, the LAFC league, type of thing. Inter Miami, for as long as they have their situation with Messi and Suarez, how much they can get out of those legs. You look at the Sounders aging core. Miami's core is not
Oh, for
particularly
sure.
spring chicken. Their window of opportunity
sure.
is their window of
Right.
opportunity. Their window of opportunity is November. So
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
like, but the salary cap and those things tend to lag behind. And I would hope that MLS players and the league are looking at that, because otherwise they're going to find themselves playing catch up. And you can't play catch up when leagues like the Saudi League and things are starting to pull some of those players that maybe you would have used for some of the marketability. Now, I'm happy not to pay 2024 prices for a 2016 player because he's past his prime. You don't want to be a retirement league, and MLS is too physical and fast a league with the travel for a lot of that. Every time the majority of the players that come over thinking, oh, I'm old enough to play in MLS now, let's make some money. It doesn't work, because they get here and within about 6 or 8 games, you start really seeing a drop off to what they're doing, because they haven't traveled back and forth across 4 time zones routinely.
Sure.
They do a couple of those trips for a Champions League match. It's fine in Europe, but most of your English league or your Spanish league, you're just basically traveling the length up and down to California.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
The wear and tear
yeah.
on players is so much different from just jet lag and travel and wellness, and it shows up in late goals and all sorts of things where teams run down. They definitely need to raise the salary cap if the money is there. Tie things to revenue, you have to, but tie things to revenue that's current, not based on years past revenues. It's got to be proactive and pushing forward, because as owners, you got to spend money to make money, and you're not going to long term if you don't.
And I understand, I understand the reason behind it. There's a lot of these owners are risk averse, and a lot of them look at the history of soccer in this country, specifically the NASL, and the mistakes that they made. They don't want to extend themselves too far and not be able to recoup that money. But we're in such a different time space right now when it comes to American soccer, to the point where not only is MLS thriving, but it's still continuing to grow. I heard that there's plans for 2 more expansion teams, and I actually think it's going to get up to 40 at one point. So that means there's definitely growth in this league, 100%.
The ghost of the NASL still is there, right? And that's 40 years ago now. Like we can move past that. Those teams didn't have stadiums. Very few teams had real consistent fan bases. When I was growing up and going to Sounders games with my parents when I was 8, 10, 12 years old in the NASL, I see the 20,000 or more that were consistently in the Kingdom. And you're 8 years old and you're seeing the Sounders play the Timbers, and it's your first game, and it's the Kingdom, and it's new and it's exciting. That's the baseline I always thought. And then you'd look and see the occasional TV game and see nobody in the stands. And there was only a handful of teams that were really drawing. That's not the case now. Teams have stadium deals. They've required it. Like, they learned their lesson coming out of 2001, 2002, when the league was temporarily not a league. Everybody's had to come in, and then when Salt Lake and Toronto proved it can work, off it went. So you definitely have different situations than you used to, but you also have to keep being forward looking. One of the ways you're forward looking is being proactive with your players, and
Yep.
you can't be cheap with your product. The product is the game. All of the brand and everything, if people don't tune in and watch and enjoy it, they don't stay tuned in or tune in the next game. They stop buying
Absolutely.
tickets. They stop buying jerseys. The jerseys are pretty. I love the blue and green, but nobody cares if the product is crap.
Yeah. And that goes along with the responsibility of Major League Soccer in marketing their stars as well too. That's where I think Major League Soccer is definitely lagging. They're not doing enough to sell a storyline, right? American sports fans, number one, love stars, but number two, they hate stars as well too. It's what makes the NFL thrive in this country is that league sells a storyline that keeps fans captivated week after week after week after week. And it's one of the things that Major League Soccer just has not done. And
there's a certain amount of hate watching that comes with all of sports,
for sure.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And you take a look at where they've put their money into the storyline. It's been looking for rivalries. And they managed to really tap into that when Portland joined the league and Vancouver joined the league, and they got Cascadia, and they went, oh, this really does work. And that's where you started getting, they tried it in LA with Chivas, it didn't work. Now with the two LAs, the Trafico, it does, right? Yes. Those are sorts of things that they really have, but those are organic. The Seattle Portland thing goes back 50 years. You have the Sounders 50th year this year, you have Portland's 50th year next year. Like, you can build on that, but you also need faces, and Messi is a face. Beckham was a face, but at the same time himself, those sorts of things have to happen, because without it, you don't get the drama.
Yep.
And the drama comes from the personalizing it. And sometimes that is not liking the other team's quarterback.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
The NBA does a great job of it. That's why they have face franchises, and why you can overpay to keep your players is because they want franchises and faces and stories to be able to work together and stick together. MLS needs some of that. A few clubs have tried to do it and build with faces, but not all of them. They've tended to go with the brand over the
right.
The thing.
And I've also noticed this weird inferiority complex of Major League Soccer, where it's about the league and not necessarily about the teams. And I don't think Major League Soccer necessarily understands that fans don't care about the league. They support clubs, they support players. You know what I mean? It's like this. I don't understand why Major League Soccer does that. Where it's about the shield, not necessarily about the teams. Not necessarily about the teams in the league. I always found that.
Yeah, and fans really are. They're supportive of the club. That's one of the things in all sports. It's part of what always made baseball so big, was the daily checking of the box scores and being able to see your team play day after day after day all summer. You wanted to feel attached to that group. You want to feel committed to it, but you don't feel committed to it if you don't know who they are. And the Sounders have done a good job with the brand and with the rivalry, but always getting the faces out there has been hard to do.
It's a partnership between league and club. So I got to push back a little bit, because you mentioned something earlier. I do have to say that I do enjoy a good relegation scrap, though. You know what I mean? You're
There's a drama to it. There is a drama to
it. For sure. Like if you're coming into the last couple of weeks of the season and you're 3 points below the drop, and you're I'll just throw this out there. You're a Sheffield United, and you're scratching and clawing for your salvation in the Premier League. And
those decision day games are a thing.
They're the best.
But the home stretch sucks. Like just watching them toil away. But yeah, I know you're going with that. But the decision day. Oh wow. Decision day is the best in everything.
But the thing about it is like, I push back on anybody in this country that says pro rel won't work. That's the great part about soccer. It's the unifier. It's so uniquely different from football, baseball, basketball, whatever. It would work because it is a galvanizing thing across communities, right? especially if in a division below, you have a team that's running away with it and they know that they're moving up. But the San Jose Earthquakes, you know what I mean, are one of the worst teams. You know what I mean? They're fighting, scratching, and clawing to stay up. It is compelling. It is compelling TV to a point where decision day would end up being one of the most watched, sporting events, just to see if they're going to be able to stay up. But I will agree with you. The infrastructure below Major League Soccer is just not there.
I would love it, right? I when I say to people it's not going to happen, it's not because I don't want it to.
Yeah.
Because I do think that you get the drama and the story that comes with that so much, and the excitement of a city when city gets back to the league after so many years. Just look at how many Americans are drawn to the story of Wrexham right now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, I know it's Ryan and Rob and all of that, but it's also that story of promotion. Wait, what? You can be a fifth tier team playing in a regional league and a 5,000 seat stadium and suddenly be pushing towards getting, within like 2-3 years with the right investment. It's drama. It's great. The infrastructure for it is just so not there. And that's
correct.
And I don't think that, and there is a perception in America, in this country, that anything that isn't major is minor, and lower division is different than minor in
Correct.
soccer. And so you look at the USL teams that have been successful over time, that have managed to stay, steady, the Charlestons, the Richmonds and whatnot. Those teams, had they had a chance to promote and then invest, and you get the money, and then you build up your stadium and do it, it could be there over time. But that needed to have happened in 2002, when the league was coming out of contraction and had your Seattles and your Portlands and those sorts of teams, in those situations, where they could have created that when it was a dozen teams with a dozen. You could have done it there. I think the window of opportunity for it in American sports from a business standpoint is past.
Oh, I 100% agree. A little bit later we'll talk about the Spokane Velocity. What's interesting about their stadium, I think they play at one Spokane stadium, and it can do a high school football field. You know what I mean? That's it. That's what it looks like from the aerial shots. I mean, it looks pretty cool. But as far as the viability of being able to move up divisions and to be able to hold 10,000 people at the very minimum, it just doesn't have that type of viability. You know what I mean?
Well, and that stadium was built to replace the high school football stadium. Part of what got that stadium built was all of that, replacing Albee,
sure,
and having the high school viability. But they placed it right there on the river next to the arena. It's got a great thing, but it puts them in a position to become the next Charleston or the clubs that in USL have managed to be there for a long time and have thriving fan bases. Spokane can be that in that situation, but could they then move that up and be competitive in MLS playing there? Just the economics of that in 2024, the economics of it in 2002.
Unless there were solidarity payments or balloon payments or things of that nature where they could stay competitive, maybe, but the revenue is just not there. It makes me go back to a buddy of mine who was looking to invest in American soccer. He was looking around the USL landscape. The championship side, USL 1, USL 2, had decided to invest overseas in England in the 5th division of English football because there was upward movement. And the juice wasn't worth the squeeze in American football. And that actually got me sad because, we need a lot more investment, especially in the 2nd division and 3rd division. Me personally, I always believe the more professional teams in this country, the better it is for development in this country, especially when it pertains to the national team, not just Major League Soccer. I actually think, maybe call me the eternal capitalist, but I do believe competition is good for everything.
Oh, and I do think that the window of opportunity with promotion and relegation was lost when a lot of the cities that may have one point been in that situation then got MLS clubs. So we ended up with promotion.
Yeah,
we ended up with a lot of promotion.
That's a very good point.
And consolidation. Did anybody really think Cincinnati would work?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Did anybody? I mean, and you look at what they're building in some of those places, right? Columbus didn't just work when they built Clear Stadium. They're on their second stadium.
Yep.
Some places struggle to get anything done, and they've managed to replace and move. I mean, there was a whole ownership hubbub with that, but
Sure.
they have actually managed to do a cycle, because if you take a look at the grand scheme of things and how long stadiums last, I mean, the Kingdom only lasted 24 years. So it's not like, if Lumen Field and T-Mobile Park are as old as the Kingdom ever got.
Right. I miss the Kingdom, by the way.
I grew up in the Kingdom.
I did
between Sounders, Sonics, Mariners,
See,
and
that,
Seahawks.
yeah.
I grew up in the Kingdom.
Yeah, see, I came a little bit later. I came up in the late 80s and the 90s with the Kingdom. So I missed the Sounders and the Sonics in the early 80s. But I definitely missed the Kingdom. It had a unique charm, even though that it was a concrete hill. It had a unique charm that, quite frankly, Lumen Field and T-Mobile Park, they're phenomenal facilities, but, they're not
the whole notion of home field advantage was the Kingdom.
That's
it was
exactly
cold,
right.
it was dark, it was ugly, it was sterile, and it was ours. I was 8 years old when they moved into it, and my parents had season tickets in the NASL era. And we're going to games, and you're seeing that, Jeff Hurst scores the first game winner in extra time against Portland in my first ever game.
That's
you
awesome.
can't, if you want to set the table for your whole life, it's things like that. So you want kids to have those experiences so it stays with them too. And we're hoping to see, we saw that maybe with Beckham in the past. We're seeing that with Messi now. Who's next with that. The league has done that. But at the same time, you definitely, getting back to what you said with promotion and relegation, I think the window passed, and the cities that maybe would have made sense and had the infrastructure have the infrastructure now, but they have the infrastructure in MLS instead of in an up and down thing. Yeah.
I will say it would have been cool to catch Pele or Johan Cruyff or George Best and some of those guys in the old NSL. That would have been a sight to behold.
It was actually. Yeah, I had the good fortune of, I grew up at a certain time and a certain age here in Seattle, and benefited from that greatly, both between seeing Pele in 1977 when I was 10 years old, to turning 21 in 1988 in Seattle during the grunge era. Like I could not have had a better good fortune and stretch of that. So
especially if you saw some of those great bands before they hit it big.
Yeah,
that was a good time for music. All right, well let's turn the page real quick, because we mentioned earlier in the show that the Sounders themselves have been investing heavily. One of the biggest investments that they made, along with Carlisle, the Carlisle Group, was a $58 million investment in the Seattle Reign. They purchased it, I believe, in 2019 from the OL Group, the Olympic Lyon Group, for $58 million. Like I said, prior to that, the Lyon Group bought it for $3.5 million. So quite a return on the investment for them. But that being said, I believe Carlisle paid a little bit more than 50% on this acquisition, but it is a partnership for the Seattle Reign, meaning that the Sounders and the Reign will stay in Seattle for generations to come. By the way, the Carlisle Group has invested more than $4 billion across the entertainment and sports industries, and they also invested in Atalanta of Serie A. So football is nothing new to them. I want to get your take on this. Like, how has this worked out for the Seattle Reign?
Well, the lag in it, I think, definitely adversely affected this season, especially at the beginning, because they did lose Rose Lavelle and Emily Sonnet in the offseason at a time when Megan Rapinoe had retired. Could they have kept Lavelle and Sonnet is speculation, but at the same time, it's an amazing coincidence of timing that there was a lull in the way ownership was behaving, with OL not necessarily investing. A couple of those players go, and now we're starting to see, with the mid-year transfer window, the Reign being super active again with the new ownership group in place. So you had the Predmores at the beginning, 10, 11 years ago. they're playing in Memorial Stadium, they're playing at Starfire. They leave that situation and spend a little bit of time in Tacoma. Oil Group comes in and they rebrand, they do all these things, and they go from just a few $1 million investment to a 58. I think the biggest part of it to me is that it's the Carlisle Group. We're starting to see the ownership of clubs in the NWSL having bigger pockets. And for the Reign, this has also brought with it this relationship with the Sounders has brought with it them taking over the Starfire space, them having a sense of longer term future. It'll be interesting to see when players are going to be re-signed. They've re-signed Heidema. They've re-signed a couple of those players that you would hope that they would resign. They ended up training Balser because reportedly she's looking to go to free agency. But I do think that the transition took longer than people had hoped to get that ownership group, and it possibly cost them this season pretty harsh. But in the big picture, it's going to be much better for them because the resources are there. You got to keep up with Gotham FC. You got to keep up with what Washington Spirit are doing. You know, what they're paying Trinity Rodman, what they're paying for those players. Those are situations where it's like it mirrors what the Sounders are having to do. The Sounders have to keep up with LAFC. Just they have to. And
Rose Lavelle, very good player, part of the U.S. women's national team, competed in the Olympics this summer. Gold medal winning team, very good player. Right now, Seattle, I believe, are in 11th in the NWSL, 20 points, 5 points below the playoff line, chasing Racing Louisville and Bay FC. The Sounders are 23 goals scored, 25 against, -2 goal differential. You mentioned that this season hasn't exactly been the greatest. Where are the goals coming from?
That's been the challenge. They had gone through a stretch going into the Olympics and coming out of it where they had a series of draws and wins and had gone 7 matches unbeaten and put themselves back right in the cusp of a playoff spot. And then the last week, we've seen them play 2 matches, 6 possible points, and not only to get no points, they got no goals. And that's been the real challenge for them right now is where have the goals come from? The defense has had long stretches of good play. The midfield's been solid, but the goals just haven't happened. They've come sporadically. When they needed them in the last week to put them in a position with a few games left to maybe make a push and beat a couple of the teams that they needed to push, now instead of being 2 points behind or 1 point behind, if they had gotten some results, they're 5. They're running out of time is what it's coming down to. And it's too bad because you saw that they had made kind of a turn. And now maybe they just are a little bit out of gas on that push. We don't know, but that seems to be where it's going. But the goals haven't been coming. I do think that the flow of play has been pretty good. You're still seeing them playing the kind of football that Laura wants them to play. They play out of the back. Their defense and their player personnel for doing that is very good. They reloaded their midfield, bringing in Jalen Howell, but they need to get some goal-scoring help. Latsko scores occasionally. Heidem is your target striker. They do get some interesting play out of CR King and whatnot, but they've got to get some more goals, and they just haven't been coming this year.
Most notably coming out, I believe, recently that Sofia Huerta has left on a loan.
Mm-hmm.
I believe she's heading over to France with Olympique Lyon.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a very big loss for their defense.
Huerta is a big loss to their offense too, because the overlapping play that the Reign playing out of the back and up their wings is a huge part. Huerta was the player who had played every minute of every game, but the opportunity to go over and play in Lyon was pretty big for her, and it was a personal thing she really wanted, and the Reign made it happen. She'll be playing, if you watch some Champions League matches and things over the next few weeks as the Women's Champions League gets going and the draw's coming, you'll see Huerta playing for Lyon, and she's going to do well there.
Well, I'm happy for her, and hopefully everything works out. What is this, by the way? I mean, before we turn our attention to the USL, What is this fascination with playing out of the back? It seems like everybody wants to play like Barcelona 2012 or Brazil 1970. Like, what is the like? I guess it does. I guess it does definitely has its pluses, but it also has its major drawbacks. Obviously, just watch the United States men's national team under Greg Berhalter, and you can see playing out the back gone wrong. But some teams do it a lot better. But
Laura Harvey teams have always done it. When the Reign first came out and got successful in 2014, 2015, they were doing that. They have a player like Lauren Barnes who can serve the ball out of the back very well. That's always been that their personnel's always been geared towards that. So that's a Laura Harvey thing. It was a little less when Vlatko Andonovski was coaching here. They definitely moved more to a midfield base. We're not sure what Farid would have done because that was a brief period and it was COVID, and then Laura came back, and a lot of it comes from I think it's a generational look at this era of coaches. They've grown up with less direct play being a part of the game. We have an era where entire generations of players have now grown up without the back pass rule. 30 years ago, you just, if you tried to play it out of the back, turn around, doink it, the goalie picks it up. And that is now a generation past, and it's changed things. And the success of Guardiola and you start looking at the teams that have done it, and most sports are copycat tactically. And
correct.
But Laura has been that way her entire tenure in both phases with the Reign, and she's had the personnel to do it. She moved where to back there. Jill Ellis with the national team, her outside backs that won World Cups were strikers that got moved back there. You go back to the 99ers with the US women, Brandy Chastain was a striker, couldn't get on the field, they move her to outside back, and then she's out there, they're doing it. And I think that the women's game has done it more and longer than the men's game has stylistically, and it's done differently. But the playing out of the back, I think, is a generational thing. A lot of younger coaches, because that's the successful soccer that they've seen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whenever I watch my beloved Spurs try to play out of the back, and you see the high press, coming towards Guillermo Vicario or Pedro Porro, Mikey Van de Ven, and all of a sudden they become a deer in headlights. Good Lord, man.
And then you look at the success but you also look at the success of high press teams, right? The success that Klopp teams have had and things like that. And the Reign do try and push up. And in years past, when they had players like Megan, they would do that. They do have personnel and they press high. And when they are able to contain teams, the goals come. It's just they've had to play in transition a lot this year. And it just hasn't worked out for them as well.
Turning our attention to the USL side, Spokane Velocity, they're currently 7th place with 26 points, 7-5-5 overall in the standings. They're 2-2-1 in their last 5. Spokane has 24 goals scored, 26 against -2 goal differential, but they have an 85% passing accuracy. It seems like they're a very efficient team. I like to see this. I like to see efficiency, and it's nice to see it with Spokane. It seems like they're in a comfortable spot, trying to make the playoffs in the USL.
Yeah, and they're not just in that 7th spot. I think it's an 8-team playoff move. Achievement there is there's a gap below them of a couple of matches. Like they have a little bit of room with not very much left. The environment there in Spokane has been exciting. I know some people. I have not crossed over the mountains yet. I did see Spokane when they played Ballard here in the Open Cup in the spring in what was just like their 2nd or 3rd ever game, and you could see a lot of potential in the way that they pressed and countered. They had a couple of opportunities that were created, and it was just they hadn't played together that much. And now they've got a full season under their belt, and they're going to, in their first year, be a playoff team. That's pretty good for any sport to do in the first year. You look at it, how much it launched Seattle when they got off to a good start in 2009. You take a look at a lot of teams that maybe are slower starting, but when you can get fans watching playoff games and whatnot and getting excitement for those sorts of later season, you build some culture with your fan base on success and achievement, and that's where that good side of competition really presses things.
I love the USL. There's something organic about the supporters groups out here in Michigan. We have Detroit City FC in the championship, and we also have the Flint City Bucks in USL Two. I mean, whenever they get together for their derby, it's something special, man. I mean, it's funny, you wouldn't think Michigan's a big soccer state, but it actually really is. And they come out and they show out for Detroit City FC and Flint City. Same thing with Lansing. It's unique when they get together to play their preseason derbies. It's absolutely fantastic. So there's something organic about the USL that I absolutely enjoy, and it's something that I think that Major League Soccer used to have. I remember when the Sounders first came online in 2009, and you would see that joy. You know what I mean? Now it seems now Major League Soccer feels so corporate that it just doesn't have it. But the USL certainly does have it, and I love it. I'm here for it 10 times out of 10. I just love it.
I felt it in that Open Cup match. Covering that Open Cup match, it was played here in Seattle. It was played in Memorial Stadium, and we can say what we want about Memorial Stadium. You know, the NWSL won't let the Reign play there anymore because of its condition, but Ballard had to play in it this year, and it still has such a vibe when you have a smaller venue, but full, and people into it, right? I got a chance to experience that with fourth tier English football last year when I went to a match at Wimbledon, and the 9,000 seat stadium that was full and rocking. It's great. I love the big stadium and 40,000, 50,000 when Portland's here, but there's something intimate about seeing a match with a couple thousand people in just confined. It's just that's a great time, and the USL has that, and also we're fortunate out here. You talk about your Detroit and Flint. We've got, Spokane now. Hopefully that'll play out. But we've got such good USL history, and now we have the USL back with teams like Ballard doing a good job of building on that in those small stadiums and getting the marketing and using the social media and developing fan bases and making their tickets things people actively seek, because a 1,500 seat stadium that's sold out, suddenly it's like, oh, I better get my ticket, right? You generate some excitement that there's 60,000 seats, it's easy to get, you don't have the scarcity. And so there's a specialness to getting tickets to some of these smaller venues that just doesn't exist elsewhere. And I think that builds on why Pro Rel would be good, because we love these lower tier teams. It's why we see the excitement of Wrexham's. It's why we see the USL cities that have been successful over time and have lasted, because they have those great little stadiums like in Charleston and whatnot. And it just creates there is a different vibe when you go to a thing like that. And as a fan, I love it.
There was a USL match earlier a couple months ago. It was Lou City versus the India 11, where they had a rocking house. They were sold out 100%. Everybody showed up. Everybody showed out. But it was also televised on CBS, and they had over 350,000 viewers for that matchup. And so, the USL definitely works. Speaking of the Ballard FC, they top the Northwest Division in the USL Two, 29 points, 9-3-2, 40 goals for. Good Lord, 16 against, plus 24 goal differential, and I believe their leading goal scorer is Austin Brummett, 7 goals in 10 games. Also, the Tacoma Stars, also in the same division, in third place with 23 points. So you're absolutely right about the Northwest in their USL sides.
It's getting real excitement. I end up down in the Ballard area myself a fair amount for reasons, and you do see a presence of Ballard FC now over the past couple of years because of their partnering with brew pubs, which is a big deal, kind of where they are. You look at the way that they've launched their brand, and I know that fans sometimes, we all bristle at the money and the brand and all of that, because it's, the icky part of money that we don't want to admit is so important in professional sports. And the Ballards of the world have done such a good job of just tapping into saying, look, we have this small stadium, let's fill it. We're going to get people there. We're going to get everybody in kits. We're going to sell merch. We're going to have it available. We're going to do stuff partnering with local businesses. Spokane's got that over there. If you take a look, they had a couple year lead in to One Spokane Stadium. You had all of the years of Albie, the Spokane Shadow had played there in years past in the USL. But now all of a sudden you've got this new building being built, and they had time to build, and they launched the brand of Velocity, and it's exciting, and they've launched the Zephyr brand with the women's side, and fans are showing up. I am looking forward to going over the mountains and seeing a game there. I was in college in Spokane for a year. It's not far from my old apartment. I'm really looking forward.
Spokane's a cool town, man.
I could have walked there back in the day, but it's just, I look forward to seeing how that plays out, because I just like to see full small stadiums and excitement. I think players thrive on it. I mean, you get better performances out of players when there is that energy in the building. I think that comes across all sports. You always hear it. Oh, the crowd is big. Yeah. Energy. It's just noise. It's a real thing, because you can feel it when it's right there, and it's amazing to watch.
Before we close the show, I'm curious about the situation between Ballard and Seattle. It's no secret that Major League Soccer is doing everything in their power to crush the USL, especially when you look at the relationship with the U.S. Soccer Federation. Conflict of interest, to say the least. And it's surprising that Ballard was able to launch in Seattle, knowing, the Sounders obviously occupy the territory. So explain to me that dichotomy between the USL and Major League Soccer in the same market.
I think the biggest thing is that I don't think Ballard is trying to be a competitor to Seattle. You have Ballard ownership that traces back into Sounders with in its ownership group, and your original coach was Jason Farrell. You have participation from people with a Sounders background, and I think that there's been these lower division, right, teams in the region. So in and of itself, it wasn't, but actually launching in Seattle was pretty ballsy. But they went to a college stadium, right? They went to Interbay, which is Seattle Pacific's stadium. They added a beer garden, so they took a capacity of 1,000, got it to 1,500, and they didn't step on toes doing that. And I have a feeling that probably didn't hurt. They're in a different part of town. It's definitely, had they gone down to Starfire where the training and everything is, maybe that would have gone differently. But they're up north of town in Ballard, and I don't think you can discount the fact that they're not really in the Sounders ownership sites and therefore in MLS's sites. But they've also done a great job of just creating excitement with an exciting look and feel and environment. And for a lot of fans, it was easy to get to games because you could go to a Ballard game and still go to Sounders games. They don't push as though they're the enemy in anything that they do. Hopefully that lasts and they don't get squished. But I do think that the USL in Spokane and Seattle is good for soccer in general, so we have to hope that it lasts.
I would love to see a preseason tournament with all the Washington sides competing, whether with the Sounders, with the Defiance, with Ballard, with Tacoma, with Spokane. I'd say what you will. I think soccer is great because it is regional, and to have like a preseason tournament, like a Washington tournament where you have those sides competing and the supporters groups are getting into it. I actually think that would be a phenomenal way to tip the cap to Washington soccer fans. I just think it would do well.
And this gets into the point that we haven't had really a chance to talk about yet, is MLS's view of the U.S. Open Cup. Where we don't have Pro Rel, we've had the Open Cup. And I do think that the first time the Sounders go over and play an Open Cup match in Spokane and play against the Velocity is going to be scalped tickets in Spokane. Like, people will be paying to go to that. And I think that that's where we're going to get it. and Seattle and this region has a love of the Open Cup because of our history with it here with our
Oh,
clubs.
absolutely.
And I think that our biggest chance of anything like that is seeing Ballard play Spokane in an Open Cup match, because they're in two different tiers of USL, getting a Sounders game in with that. If Ballard ever plays the Sounders,
it's gonna be bananas.
and
It's gonna be a
it's
zoo.
going to be such a good time.
Yeah.
I want all of these teams to thrive and do well, and I would love it if we could have the pro-rel infrastructure to do it. But I think, like we've talked about, the window of opportunity might be closed.
I had a problem with Major League Soccer doing what they did in the U.S. Soccer Federation, essentially just being like, that's cool. I had a problem with it, and it's not necessarily about the history. It's the fact that as the first division, the top flight in American soccer, Major League Soccer has responsibility at the U.S. Open Cup, and of course, their response is scheduled congestion. No. It's finances. They don't make enough money off the U.S. Open Cup. And by the way, the U.S. Open Cup used to be, I guess you can say, marketed by Soccer United Marketing, and of course, they never did any. They never did anything to prop up the Open Cup for fear of potential revenue loss to the USL sides, and so they created this fake tournament with Liga MX. I'm not a big fan of League Cup because I think it just oversaturates everything. But that being said, I do believe that Major League Soccer has a responsibility to U.S. soccer, to United States soccer. They have that responsibility as the first tier to compete in it. It's fantastic when USL sides show up. As a matter of fact, this year in the U.S. Open Cup here in Detroit, Detroit City FC beat the Houston Dynamo, and the Dynamo had their first team out, and Detroit City FC beat them in a shootout. Phenomenal soccer. Phenomenal. And that's what the Open Cup is about.
The Open Cup play-in matches are going on now, and in the regional leagues here, there's a couple of clubs that are making a point of really saying we're trying to get there because we want to play. There's a good tier of those leagues in this region, and you see them actively doing it, and they're building on social media, and they're getting excitement over it. And I think that the U.S. Open Cup not being embraced by MLS, let alone them pissing on it, the fact that they're not embracing it is the problem. This is a chance for them to make it pervasive, right?
Yeah.
Like look at us, and we're going to have this amazing thing. And that's a bit naive, but I do think that those Open Cup matches are what made MLS happen in Seattle in 2002, 2003. San Jose came in here with a young Landon Donovan, and the Sounders USL teams took them to overtime or beat them, and they got MLS teams in here not just for friendlies, but for US Open Cup quarterfinal against LA Galaxy 2003, those sorts of things. It built the excitement so that in 2007, when that announcement hit, there was a history of those clubs playing the Sounders, and now we got to move up. We got our promotion by being an expansion team, and that excitement was there, and in part because of the Open Cup.
And if you remember, in the first 5 years of this franchise's MLS history, they won 4 U.S. Open Cups. They actually took it seriously, and I remember those U.S. Open Cup finals. Though they were phenomenal. It was phenomenal to watch. But I will say this: from the days of Brian Cheen to the days of Brad Smith and Sebastian Letou to Freddie Montero to Alvaro Fernandez, Obafemi Martins, Clint Dempsey, the lineage of great Sounders. I hope that continues.
Especially given Clint Dempsey's particular history in the Open Cup.
Yeah, for sure. I hope it continues, but I also hope, for the sake of the Seattle Sounders, I hope that we get back to being the team that is universally hated around Major League Soccer. It's true. The Sounders are universally hated around. I would love nothing more to see the Sounders be back on top and literally just beating the hell out of LAFC. I can't stand LAFC. You know what I mean? So hopefully good days are good days are ahead of us, because I don't, there is no clear cut plan for the Seattle Sounders. Ownership is not letting their supporters be privy to exactly what's going on with that franchise moving forward, let alone the reign. And what we're seeing now is I think I read somewhere that season ticket renewalship is at 90%, but match day tickets have dipped. So you're not seeing those large crowds, let alone having the stadium open for big matches. That's just not happening anymore these days. To me, that's a little sad because there's nothing better when that entire stadium is open for big matches, and you have 50,000 at Lumen Field just going absolutely bananas. Those were the days, man. Those were the days.
Indeed. Well,
that's going to do it for us. Jeff, I want to thank you for stopping by. And if you want to read some good stuff, go check out Jeff's work. Jeff, where can they find you?
All right. I'm at Prost International, and you'll see my stuff mostly covering the rain and occasional Sounders and some other stuff here in the area. I look forward to maybe being back.
Absolutely. This has been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We will be back Friday with a very special guest as we talk U.S. men's national team. So look for that on the social media. You can find me at Stateside Footy on Twitter and also on Instagram as well too at Stateside Footy 27. So I want to thank Jeff for stopping by. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Until we meet again on Friday, you guys have a wonderful evening and thank you again.